Hi, welcome to this part of my review featuring The Wicked Ones. This is the role-playing game where the player characters participate as goblins, kobolds, trolls, ogres, wights. You are the monsters of the dungeon and you have to protect your dungeon from adventurers while you are trying to take over the surrounding lands. If you haven't seen the other parts of this review, please check out the playlist in the description below. In this part, we are going to talk about additional rules such as flashbacks, progress clocks, gear and supply, tiers and enemies, power struggles, and many other things. Now let's start with adjusting rolls. There are some tricks that you can use to manipulate your rolls at a cost. However, each roll can only benefit from a particular method. First we have Go Hard. Even in risky conditions, it's assumed that player characters want to minimize the damage to themselves. This leaves some room for extra effort. Going hard at a task means that you're giving up on the idea of self-preservation. What this means, mechanically speaking, is that you gain a positive effect on an action roll, but you suffer a negative position. You need to explain how you disregard your own safety to give it your all. Trading position for effect is already possible with the correct narration, but going hard makes this a simple process. You announce to the table and to the game master that you are very clearly putting yourself at risk to achieve a better result. So for example, if you go hard on a dire roll, the roll becomes deadly. Then we have Assist. You assist another player character or a minion pack by lending a hand, creating an opening, causing a diversion, or commanding them. This puts yourself in harm's way though. Assist, mechanically speaking, gives someone a positive effect on an action roll, but you also suffer any consequences from that roll. You need to explain what you do to give an advantage. Assisting creates momentary, fleeting advantages that disappear once that action is resolved. You can assist an ally by knocking a paladin's shield aside, but it would take an action roll to knock it out of their hands. In most cases, there's no need for a roll, though you can only assist someone if your approach wouldn't have a weak effect as an action roll. Each roll can only benefit from one assist. Then we have Team Up. Your player characters can put aside the petty squabbling that lesser monsters get caught up in and cooperate on tasks, though you risk stress and greater consequences in the process. You can team up with your fellow monsters when you need to join forces to maximize your chances at accomplishing one singular goal. Make up for clumsy or unskilled allies, or use cooperation to have greater effect. Mechanically speaking, each player character who's involved makes an action roll using the same action. The team counts the single best result as the overall team effort. This also gives the action scale, possibly affecting position and effect. However, any player character that rolls a mixed or a failure takes stress. So you might team up, as mentioned earlier, to cover for weaker allies, to act as a single team to gain scale, and to make sure that you get the job done. Next, we have information on narrating smoothly. When you team up, everyone involved takes a role in narrating the result. First, you describe your action and intention as part of the team's role, remembering that you're all trying to accomplish one singular goal together using the same action. The game master sets position and effect for the overall roll, accounting for scale, and then everyone makes their roll. Once you know the results, you work backwards. If it was a success, maybe those who rolled failures can explain what went wrong, and those with successes can narrate how they covered for their allies. If it was mixed, maybe nobody really accounted for the failures, but you still managed to pull it off. Then, once the actions of the player characters are clear, the game master steps in and starts handing out any consequences suffered. Then we have Flashbacks. Just as engagement rolls let us cut ahead to the action already in progress, flashbacks let us cut back to when something important happened. Making detailed plans that might never come to fruition isn't all that fun, so flashbacks allow you to have done something in the past that your character would have thought to do. You can flashback to any scene that a player character of your calling would have likely thought to do. Mechanically speaking, this means that you spend stress to flashback to a scene between the last recovery and the present, You can flashback to perform an extra downtime action, but you must also pay cost as you overwork yourself. When you call for a flashback, you first describe the basics of what you want to accomplish. The game master judges whether it was possible and likely for a player character with your calling to think to do it, and a flashback then works just like a normal scene. The scope of a flashback is limited to a single scene and a couple of action rolls. Sometimes a roll isn't even required within a flashback. You can flashback to spending gold, for example, which includes paying minions to perform downtime actions. Next we have progress clocks. Sometimes tasks are larger than one action, interconnected parts of an entire plan, events unfolding over time, or a challenge quite difficult to overcome. When these situations need to be tracked, the game master can draw a clock and tick it as progress happens. Mechanically speaking, this means that a circle with 4, 6, or 8 segments is used by the game master to track progress over time, whether that be for a task the player characters are working on, trouble heading their way, or situations developing out of their control. Generally, the more complex the situation, the more segments in the progress clock. A complicated obstacle is a 4-segment clock, a more complex obstacle is a 6-segment clock, and a daunting obstacle is an 8-segment clock. When the progress clock is full, something happens. An obstacle is overcome, a situation comes to fruition, or perhaps consequences are inflicted, or a goal is reached. This can't be resisted. You can resist the ticking of the clock, but once the clock is full, whatever happens, happens. It's the game master's job to tick a clock so it reflects what's happening in the story. Then we have information on the types of clocks. Clocks are meant to be flexible. Ticks on a clock are based on the type of clock and what it represents. They are a representation of the fictional situation, developing, and sometimes the roles and fiction don't quite match up. Don't be afraid to give an extra tick, hold one back, or end a clock early. Clocks tend to work best when all can see them, even if they are not labeled yet, though the choice of whether to show a clock or not is up to the game master. There are 3 basic types of clocks. Objective clocks are used to represent complex goals the player characters want to achieve, like casting a ritual, slipping through town, taking down a griffin, or negotiating peace with a tribe of orcs. There are danger clocks, which are used to represent impending threats, like guards being alerted, some local humans being pushed far enough to hire adventurers, or angering a dragon. You also have situation clocks. They are used to represent the world moving around the player characters, like a war between 2 factions, a huge storm passing through, or a town building a new wall. Then we have clock interactions. Clocks can interact with each other in a few ways that make working with them in play quite interesting. You have racing clocks, which are used to represent competing goals, like building a battering ram before reinforcements arrive, or racing bandits to a juicy merchant caravan you both just heard about, or escaping from the guard while they are trying to corner you. You also have layered clocks. They are used to represent multi-step, complex situations, like sneaking through town and into a well-guarded fortress, taking down a mighty knight's defenses until they are vulnerable, or setting up a complex ritual. You also have information on how to use clocks well. When you create an obstacle clock, be sure to make it about the obstacle, not the method. When you make a danger clock, make it about the consequence of it being filled. When it comes to complex enemy threats, they can be broken into several layers, each with its own progress clock. Clocks like these, representing obstacles, are great for theater of the mind style of play, where you don't make use of maps. Next, you have information on fortune rolls. There are times where the game master needs to make a judgment call about the world and either isn't sure what the answer might be or doesn't want to make that call on their own. In these cases, they can make a fortune roll to see how things turn out. The amount of dice rolled is determined by the likelihood of events turning out well for the one you are rolling for. Fortune rolls also fill in the gaps when there isn't a specific rule or some information within the story is unclear. So when it comes to fortune rolls, you are basically rolling 1, 2, or 3 dice, depending on the likelihood of something good happening, with the results determining how good it is. It could be a failure, a mixed result, a success, or a critical result. When the game master makes a fortune roll, they choose the party that they are rolling for. It could be the player characters as a whole, a certain player character, a faction, a non-player character, and so on. The results are from that party's perspective. Now when it comes to gear and supply, these are tools of the trade. Weapons, traps, lanterns, wands, rope, torture implements, voodoo masks, bone necklaces, bracers, shields, it could be anything. So gear covers the items that you always have on you and that you make regular use of. Supply covers the things that you own or have access to, but might not always be carrying on you. They are things stowed on your belt, across your back, or in a bag. Any item in your supply must be able to be carried in one hand or fit nicely in a backpack. Items such as concussions, potions, anything else that is limited to one use must always be placed in supply. And the items are of three categories. They could be mundane items, valuable items, or even powerful items. When you buy, steal, make, or acquire an item, you add it to your gear or supply. If several items serve the same purpose, you can combine them into just one gear or supply, such as writing down armor to represent a helmet and shield, or tool pouch to cover a variety of minor tools. When it comes to gear defense, monsters tend to love their possessions, clearly favoring evil style over substance, but that doesn't mean that things chosen mostly for appearance are useless. You have a single defense based on the items you've chosen. It can be derived from a single item or multiple items working together, though gear only ever gives one defense total. So in order to correct things using your gear, maybe you use a whip to correct the mistakes of a minion. Maybe you are wearing a dark cloak or soft boots to avoid detection. Or maybe you are wearing a mask or wearing impressive clothes and jewelry to avoid getting caught lying to hide your intentions. You work with the game master to decide what defense your gear provides to you. Now when it comes to weapons, like other items, they count as a circumstance. It's important to remember that almost all weapons are deadly. A dagger can kill just as easily as a great sword when used at the right time and the right place. The most common weapons strike a good balance. A sword can be held in one hand and easily stowed away or carried while moving, but it's also deadly enough to deal significant damage to most enemies. A dagger might struggle against armored opponents, but can be hidden and doesn't hinder movement. It's all about that balance. How ammunition is handled is up to each group, but what usually works best is to assume that you always have enough until you don't. When it comes to the definition of steady supply in this game, a steady supply represents constant access to a consumable resource, such as a potion or concussion. Some abilities and dungeon rooms give steady supplies, but they might also be gained through in-game play or a discovery. And when it comes to shared supply, this is when the dungeon has gained a resource of something and all members have access to it. These supplies are often represented by a clock, usually 4 segments long, and you tick each of those segments each time it is used. Now let's talk about gold. When you are leading a dungeon, all the treasure you gather goes to the horde. Gold is a measure of how much of that horde each player character controls individually. You can spend each chunk of the horde, that is 1 gold, to accomplish things without going through the effort yourself. Gold can be spent at any point during downtime or within scenes, even using your calling flashbacks to spend it in the past. Gold is gained through revelry, as you sift through the loot from your last raid. Most of the loot goes into the horde and keeps the denizens of your dungeon in line. It's called gold for simplicity, but it represents whatever your dungeon hoards. You could spend gold perhaps to get a vile friend or faction to help you. You could use it for the pay cost rules feature. You can also use it to pay your minions to perform a downtime action or to come on a raid with you. You could also use it to recruit a minion pack or attract a creature, or perhaps upgrade a minion pack. Now let's talk about power struggles. Being monsters, it's natural for the player characters to come into conflict with each other. Shenanigans, arguments, and fights are commonplace. To allow for this without making such interaction feel mechanically punitive, unfun, and something that players want to avoid, player characters can engage in power struggles. This happens when 2 or more player characters are at odds with each other, and you need to figure out who gets their way. The power struggle process consists of 5 steps. First, you start the struggle. You choose an action and roll it. You compare the results. The winner narrates their win, and the loser narrates their reaction. This power struggle mechanic serves as a way to push the story forward. Anytime the player characters find a deadlock or they are not very sure on how to proceed, the game master can call for a power struggle to get things moving again. Next, we have information on tiers and enemies. Factions, targets, dungeons, adventurers, and many other elements within the game are ranked by tier, grouping them into categories of similar items, which allows you to determine their relative power, effectiveness, or challenge levels. Each tier has a relative strength of double its previous tier. Tiers can be considered as circumstances towards position and effect. You have dungeon tiers and faction tiers. The dungeon tier represents the size of your dungeon's horde and how powerful your dungeon, the Wicked Ones, and the minions have grown. Faction tiers represent how powerful organized groups in the region are, such as a town, a tribe, or a garrison of soldiers. Now, when it comes to facing enemies, as you raid the overworld, you will come across a variety of those. How these enemies are modeled within the scenes is up to the game master. Enemies are just like any other obstacle, something in your way that you take action to overcome. The game master might also model larger groups of enemies as a single unit, giving them an advantage of scale versus you, negatively impacting position and effect. Now, when it comes to adventurers, they are tenacious, greedy, powerful, and relentless. They are unlike other enemies. They have the passive hearts and moves features, which guarantee that they appear in a scene and they have an impact on that scene. And you have details on their offensive moves and defensive moves as well. When it comes to advancement, you begin play as a dangerous monster, able to go toe-to-toe with a seasoned caravan mercenary, match wits with a local priest, or duel a journeyman magician. But as you practice your evil arts, you expand your power and gain access to more abilities, turning into something much more terrible and powerful. You gain experience points for role-playing as a monster, being an active co-author of the game as a player at the table, and matching the game's mechanics to the fiction even when the odds aren't on your side. So when wrapping up a session, you go around the table and recount how the session went. Each player character goes down the list of triggers, remembering how they hit that trigger in play. This makes for a great session review at the end of each session. Other players can help them out if they remember outstanding moments. So for example, the player could decide whether they get experience points for hitting the trigger or not. So when it comes to these triggers, you mark 1 wicked experience point for each trigger met within the session. So for example, maybe you made progress on your master plan. Maybe you jumped into someone else's dungeon scene. Perhaps you acted like a monster, as monsters should. You used your gear or supply in creative ways. So by fulfilling these criteria, you obtain experience points. But there are also reckless experience points. Monsters learn best when their backs are against the wall. As you scrape by, barely living through a situation or giving in to your dark impulse, you learn how to better apply your actions. When you go feral or become bloodied and go out of your way to roleplay through those situations, you can mark 1 reckless experience point. You gain this experience point by playing up how injured you are or going the extra mile to make your feral movements fun. You can only gain a maximum of 1 reckless experience point per session. You can also obtain experience points by practicing. After you make an action or resistance roll with an action that has no dots in it, you gain 1 practice experience point for the action that you rolled. Now when it comes to new characters, when you lose or get tired of playing a character, the nature of a dungeon makes it easy to bring in a new one. Dungeons are always open to new monsters moving in, and a wicked one would quickly prove to be useful. Power recognizes power quickly. When bringing in a new character, setting up an off-screen montage works well. Figure out a reason for your new character to be in the dungeon. You should also make it easy for new player characters to work themselves in, of course. An early power struggle often establishes a new character as a competent and interesting presence, so find something fun to argue about and make it happen. When a character dies, you can create a new one quickly and work them in during the current session, or have them join up during the next recovery. However, in the meantime of that process, you could also play as your minions, you could play as another player character's minions, or you could play as a monster wandering by. Now let me give you an example of gameplay. This example is called A Library Needs Books. Having established their dungeon, the player characters head out to raid a caravan from the Abbey. It's transporting a trove of books, which the dungeon needs for its newly built library. The player characters set up an ambush and get a mixed result on their engagement roll, with even footing. So the game master speaks. The cart comes rumbling down the road. At the helm is a teamster and, beside him, a guard with a crossbow. In the back of the cart, you all see what you came for, crates full of books. Just as you start knocking down the tree to block the road, the sound of another cart catches your attention. It's a gilded carriage, obviously with someone pretty important inside, and an armed guard driving it. You didn't expect to see anyone else. Just then, the tree cracks and breaks, smashing down onto the road in front of the cart with a loud boom. The orc brute Ulrot speaks.
While the horses are kinda rearing up from being scared by the tree, I'm gonna run in there and chop them free from the cart. I'll smash it with my axe.
The game master speaks. Sounds good. Let's see the roll. Ulrot rolls 3D smash and gets a mixed. The game master continues. You're gonna get the horses free of the cart, but one's gonna turn towards you and pummel you with its front hooves. You take shock to brains. Ulrot continues.
Nah, I'm gonna resist that. I can't use smash since I just rolled that, right? I guess I'll go with finesse and dodge out of the way.
Ulrot rolls 1D finesse and gets a mixed. The game master continues. Alright, partially resisted. You take 2 stress from the mixed result, and let's say that instead of shock, you end up with that guard having you in their sights. Tell us what that all looks like. Ulrot continues.
Okay, so I bust out the bushes and run full speed into the road. I take a huge leap and bring the axe crashing down into the wood connecting the horses to the cart. It just shatters into splinters, sending the horses into a panic. That's when they lash out at me, but I guess I'm able to duck and weave just enough to avoid getting brained.
The game master continues. The horses take off into the woods. That guard's on the verge of sticking a crossbow bolt into you. You can also hear the other cart's driver yelling now as it speeds towards you. Then we have Slem, the Slizik Shadow.
No worries. I got your back here, Ulrot. I'm gonna stick that crossbow guy with my dagger. It's a pretty precise throw, so it's finesse.
The game master continues. It's dire, but Ulrot's probably gonna take the consequence here. Slem continues.
Better not miss then. Can I get a dark bargain?
The game master continues. Sure. What if that gilded carriage guard is a tier 1 adventurer instead? Slem continues.
Alright, I'll take it. We're just gonna load up on books and hightail it out of here anyway, right?
Crag, the kobold shaman, speaks.
Whoa, whoa, whoa! Whoever is in that cart is high profile, and we're gonna need some good prisoners because I've got some ideas.
Slem continues.
Alright, we'll fight it out, but I'm still taking the dark bargain, and I'm gonna dump a dark heart into this too.
Slem rolls 4D finesse and gets a critical. Slem continues.
Nice! The dagger slices through the air and gets stuck in that guy's eye socket. Blood comes gushing out. How about for the critical? The teamster takes one look at their dying body and runs off.
The game master continues. Sounds good to me. He starts screaming and jumps off the cart, running past the carriage behind them. The adventurer isn't phased. He hops down from the carriage and brings his bow up to fire in one smooth motion. He's using a move here, sending an arrow flying straight at you, Olrot, smashing into your chest. You're gonna be bloodied. Crag continues.
I resist for him. I see what he's about to do, and hold my staff up high. I invoke Wild Heart magic, and give a shrill whistle. Our view shifts to a raven high up in a tree. It gives a loud caw and takes flight.
Crag rolls 3D invoke and gets a failure. The game master continues. Oof, 3 stress and you wind up with shock to guts here. Crag continues.
The raven dives down from above, intent on catching the arrow, but overshoots and instead gets hit by it. I growl at the adventurer, my anger manifests in shock. Okay, let's see if that raven had any friends, I say as I start thumping my staff on the ground.
And that concludes this part of the review for today. As you can see, the rules contain many elements to weave storytelling with some reconstruction of time or past events. So this further empowers the authorship of the player characters. However, the game master has final say on many things. So it's a nice balance on the game master's input and the player's feedback. I hope you will watch the other parts of this review. Thanks for watching these parts, and thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending drive-thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.